Shabbos Daf Vav contains 3 Mishnayos, ends one parak, and begins the next one, but it's all really on one subject. The first 2 Mishnayos will discuss the minimum size of animal food and human food. And then the third Mishnah is the first Mishnah in the next parak, the 8th chapter of Masechta Shabbos, which discusses humans' drinks and liquids that humans use. So the subject for the entire discussion will be the minimum size that people use, save, and store. The Mishnah will start with different types of animals and their feed. The Gemara, following the first Mishnah, will discuss what happens if you brought the wrong amount to the wrong animal or the wrong food to the wrong animal. Does that count as carrying or not? And then we'll also discuss whether you can combine different types of things which have different sizes. Then we'll get to the Mishnah about human food and start the next parak which discusses human drinks. So let's begin. First of all, the Mishnah lists the various different types of food and when they are considered to be significant enough in size to be chayav for carrying them, to violate an issur d'oraisa of carrying, and each one will be a list of what particular food is eaten by each animal. So each food, the minimum size, will be a mouthful of the animal that eats that food. So the first thing on the list is straw. Straw is fed to cows. Straw is made from the stalks of grain. Straw is fed to cows. So the minimum size to save, store, and therefore be chayav violating issur d'oraisa for carrying it is a cow's mouthful. Then the Mishnah talks about something called eitzah, which it will describe as straw made from the stalks of bean plants. So that's fed to camels, and therefore the size is a camel's mouthful. Next we have something called amir, which is a different type of straw. It's not clear what the difference is. It's softer and it's more easily chewed. That's fed to lambs, and the size is a lamb's mouthful. Grass is the size of the mouthful for a goat. Now, leaves of garlics and onions is human food, and therefore, if they're fresh, it's human food. If it's fresh, it's the size of a dried fig, a gregaris, which is the minimum mouthful for a human. The minimum size to be considered eating for a human is more accurate. If, however, you have dried garlic and onion leaves, that's fed to goats, and therefore it has to go by the goat's mouthful. Now the Mishnah says these sizes, if you have a bit of one material, a bit of the other material, it cannot combine to any size. It has to be a uniform material. It has to be one type of material reaching the size. It cannot be a combination for the simple reason that they have different sizes. You can't combine materials that have a minimum amount of different sizes to reach any minimum. Now we begin the Gemara. The Gemara first defines what eitzah is. Rav Yehuda says it is straw that's made from the plants that grow beans. Okay, now the Gemara discusses what happens if you took the wrong material to the wrong animal, and therefore it's obviously the wrong size. So the Gemara will have 2 versions of this discussion. It's Machlokes Rav Yochanan and Reish Lakish, but there are 2 versions of it. Rav Dimi's version, he came from Eretz Yisrael, and he said what happened was you took cow food in the size for a cow to a camel. That's not enough to feed a camel. A camel usually gets more than that. Now the camel can eat the cow's food, but for him it's not the right amount. So you got the minimum amount of food, but to the wrong animal, to the animal to which it's not enough. What's halacha there? So Rav Dimi said that Reish Lakish said it's not an issur d'oraisa. It's not the minimum amount. You did not reach the level of chiyuv. However, Rav Yochanan, first at nighttime, he said you are chayiv. This is an issur because you did count the right amount. You brought the right amount. You just brought it to the wrong animal. Later in the morning, Rav Yochanan retracted and said like Reish Lakish. So now, the Gemara says some comments on this. Rav Yosef says, correct, Rav Yochanan retracted because halacha is like Reish Lakish, that it doesn't count as carrying the minimum amount because you didn't bring enough to feed a camel. Abaye says, what do you mean? How could you say that? You carry the minimum amount. What does it make a difference where you brought it? You carried the minimum amount of this food. It's cow food, and you carried enough to feed a cow. Who cares where you went with it? So the Gemara says, Abaye is right, and therefore this entire version of the discussion is wrong. That's actually not what happened. What actually happened was the opposite. You took camel food to a cow. Now, it was the right amount. It was the amount needed to feed a cow. However, it was not enough to feed a camel, and it's camel food. So it's not the right amount for this material, but you did bring enough to feed the cow. So what happens then? So the Gemara says this is a machlekes of Yochanan and Reish Lakish. And here the opinions are the opposite. Reish Lakish says you chayiv. You brought enough to feed the cow will eat it. The cow doesn't like eating camel food, but it can, and that counts as eating, and therefore you fed the cow an amount that it needs to eat, and you're chayiv for it. Rabbi Yochanan, however, says no. What you brought for the cow doesn't count. He will only eat camel food in a pressing situation, and it doesn't count as eating. It doesn't count like you fed him. And for camels, you didn't carry out enough, and therefore you did not carry out the minimum amount. Meaning, Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish here both agree that had you carried the minimum amount for that material, had you carried a camel's mouthful for camel food, that would have been enough to make you in violation of the Isser D'Oraisa, no matter where you were going with it. The question here is where I carried too small for this material, but for my purpose, it was enough. It was enough to feed the cow. The question is that called enough to feed a cow? Is that called something, if you feed a cow food that it doesn't like, is that called that you did something, that you fed the cow? Or is it called insignificant and it doesn't count at all? Okay. That concludes that discussion. Now we go back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah had said that the shear for a mir is a lamb's mouthful. The Gemara says no, but there's a brisa that says that it's a gregaris, a dried fig, which is a human amount. So the Gemara says, yeah, a lamb's mouthful is also a gregaris, it's also a dried fig. The only reason our Mishnah listed it as lamb's mouthful is to teach you the explanation for why that is the size. Okay. Now the Gemara says we had said in the Mishnah that you cannot combine different materials to any measure. So the Gemara is going to have a statement of Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina limiting this. The Gemara will have a kasha and a teretz. So Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina said that's only true if you're trying to combine to the larger shear. Meaning you have two materials. One has a larger shear, one has a smaller shear. So you can't count the one that generally has a smaller shear to the larger shear. It's not significant enough to make up the larger shear. So you can't make the larger shear, but you can combine it to the smaller shear. The one that usually has a larger shear is at least enough to fill in the missing amount for the smaller shear. Why not? It does function for the smaller shear. So what is the kash on this? The Gemara says we have a Mishnah that talks about combining materials in a different sugya, and there it says you can't combine, but it gives a specific reason that doesn't apply here. What's the discussion there? It's talking about cloth. The halach is that cloth can only be mekabel tumah, can only become tamei when a zav sits on it, if it's a certain minimum size. What's the minimum size? Depends on the material. If it's regular woven cloth, it's got to be 3 tvachim by 3 tvachim. If it's sackcloth, which is made from goat hair, it's got to be 4 tvachim by 4 tvachim. If it's leather, 5 tvachim by 5 tvachim. And if it's a mat made from woven reeds, it's got to be 6 tvachim by 6 tvachim. Now the Brisa says some of these materials can combine with others. What are they? Cloth can combine with sacking can combine with leather, and leather can combine with mat, but you can't jump. Now, the Brisa also says, what's the reason for this? What's the reason that these materials can combine? It's because they are sometimes functional together. People sometimes make a patch for a saddle out of combined materials, and therefore, since they function together, sometimes you can combine them to one size and use one shear. And the minimum size there is actually only 1 tefach by 1 tefach. When you combine them, 1 tefach by 1 tefach is enough. Like we learned quite a while ago, this shear is only when you originally make a cloth that's to that size. If, however, it's you make a cloth and the cloth is then shrunk because you ripped off a piece. If, however, you intended to make a patch, it's a small size, so then it's okay. So anyway, this Brisa, this Mishnah clearly says that the only way you can combine different materials into one size, different materials that have different halachos for size, into one, the only way that you can do that is if they function together under any circumstances. However, different types of animal feed don't function together at all. There's no way to combine them because no animal will eat other animals' feed. Okay, this is a little shver based on what we learned before, that camels will eat cow food, but that's what the Gemara says. So the Gemara answers no, they do combine. There is a function in which you can combine different types of feed, and that's if you're selling them and you put them in your window to advertise the stock, you put them all together, mixed together. As a matter of fact, you prefer it that way because then it won't blow away in the wind. Okay, this is the end of the discussion of this Mishnah. Now we get to the discussion of human foods. The Mishnah says, what is the minimum amount of food that one would violate the Issur D'Oraisa if he carries out in the street. It says it's a dried fig, a gregaris. It's halacha Moshe Sinai. That's what it is for all types of food, and therefore all types of food can be combined with each other to make up this amount because they are all the same size. They all have the same minimum size. Now, it only applies to the edible parts of the food: the shells, the pits, the stems, bran, whether it's fine bran, subin, or it's morson. That's fine bran, or subin, which is coarse bran. None of that counts. Now, Rabbi Huda says there is one type of shell that does count: lentil shells. People eat lentil shells. They cook them together with the lentils and they eat them, and therefore they do count towards the minimum size. Okay, the Gemara first of all asks, how could you tell me that bran doesn't combine? We know that in Hilchos Challah, bran, it does combine. Challah is a mitzvah to give part of the dough that you make to the Kohanim, and there is a minimum amount to how much flour you need to be using to have the mitzvah of challah apply to the dough that you made, and that minimum includes both regular flour and bran. So Gemara says, Abaye explains the halacha of Shabbos and the halacha of challah are different standards. In Shabbos, we said in the Mishnah earlier that it's only the type of material and amount that most people use. So most people don't use bran, and therefore it doesn't count to this amount. However, Chala's halachas don't go by most people, they go by any people. Any type of food, any type of bran or flour or wheat that's combined to make the flour counts as long as people use it, some people. And a poor person uses the bran. Therefore, it counts in Hilchos Challah. It doesn't count in Hilchos Shabbos because it's not most people. It does count in Hilchos Challah because it is some people. Okay, now the Gemara asks on Rabbi Huda. Rabbi Huda said lentils count. Lentil shells count. The Gemara says elsewhere in a brisa, Rabbi Huda says lentil and bean shells count. Why did he leave out the beans here? The Gemara says there's a difference between fresh beans and old beans. Fresh beans, the shells count. Old beans, the shells don't count. Rabbi Abba explains why. Because they turn black, and then they look like flies on your plate, and they look very unappetizing, and nobody eats them. That's the end of Parak Klal Gadol. Now we start the new parak, which is Hamoitzi Yayin. Okay, so the new mission discusses liquids. The minimum size liquid that one would be in violation of the Issur D'Oraisa if he carries them. So the Mishnah says wine is the amount of wine you would normally put in a cup. Now remember, wine in the days of Chazal was mixed with 3 parts water. So this wouldn't be to fill the cup. It would be enough to mix with water to fill the cup. The Gemara will discuss what size cup. Now milk is a swallowful. Honey is used as a salve on wounds, so the amount that you would need on a wound. Machlok is here whether it's a human wound on his hand or a wound on the back of a horse or a camel. Now oil is used to anoint, to rub on the skin, so that's the minimum amount for that would be the amount that you need to rub your smallest limb. Water is the amount that you use to mix with eye makeup, and all other drinkable things, the Mishnah says, goes with the size of a revius. That's a revius of a loig. It's about 3.5 ounces to 4 ounces. As a matter of fact, the Mishnah continues and says all other liquids go by revius. Now Rav Shimon disagrees. Rav Shimon says, no, really every single thing in this Mishnah is a revius. The things that we gave smaller sizes for are only things that somebody hides them in that small size. If he carries them out in that small size, so then for him, that's an issue. But for other people, it is not. It's not the general size for everybody. Okay, now the Gemara says, what is the size of a cup? You said the amount to mix with water, the amount of wine to mix with water in a cup. What size cup? So the Gemara says, a nice cup. What's a nice cup? A nice cup is a cup that you have to make nice, because you're going to use it for Birchas HaMazon. You're going to use it for Kol Shel Bracha for Birchas HaMazon. Now, what's that size? Rav Nachman says, it is a revius, and you have to therefore put in 1/4 of a revius, which you're going to mix with 3 parts water, and have a normal full cup. Now, Rava says that you can actually prove this from our Mishnah. Abaye disagrees, and we'll get to that discussion on the Daf Ayin Zayin, which we will discuss tomorrow.